Picture yourself standing among the burnt ruins of Luoyang at the close of the 2nd century, where boulevards once bloomed with blossom and palace roofs once caught the morning sun, now reduced to ash, broken walls, and silence. And it is from this haunting image that we begin the story of China's greatest ancient empire, the Han Dynasty, a tale that stretches back nearly 2,000 years to the slow-motion collision of the Indian and Asian tectonic plates. A crash that thrust up the world's tallest mountains, the Himalayas, and in doing so carved out a new landscape to their east, where two great rivers, the Yangtze and the Yellow River, nurtured the earliest Chinese civilizations along their banks. While the Yangtze flowed steady and calm, the Yellow River carried such immense quantities of silt that its bed slowly rose above the surrounding land, causing it to burst its banks again and again in catastrophic floods. And it was on this fertile yet unforgiving soil that humans first farmed, first smelted bronze and then iron, and gradually built small settlements into great walled cities, a process of growth that, ironically, made weapons cheap and plentiful and plunged the land into a brutal era remembered as the Warring States period, when 7 rival kingdoms fought for supremacy until one of them, Qin, under its ambitious king Qin Shi Huang, conquered all the others and declared himself China's first emperor. Yet this new empire, for all its grandeur, collapsed within barely 15 years, as Qin Shi Huang, consumed by a terror of death, spent his final years chasing immortality and quite possibly poisoned himself with the mercury pills his physicians prescribed as an elixir of eternal life, and after his death his empire splintered into chaos. It was in this vacuum that an unremarkable man named Liu Bang, once a minor sheriff with a fondness for wine, rose from obscurity, freed a column of enslaved laborers rather than deliver them to a tyrant's tomb, defeated his rivals after years of civil war, and in 202 BC proclaimed himself the new emperor of a unified China, naming his dynasty Han. And so began 4 centuries that would come to be remembered as one of the golden ages of Chinese civilization. An era whose name endures today in the identity of the Han Chinese, the world's largest ethnic group. But the new dynasty inherited an empty treasury and a shattered economy. And worse still, it faced a formidable threat on its northern frontier from the Xiongnu, fierce horse-riding nomads, who overwhelmed the first Han emperor's army and trapped him inside the walled city of Beiding, a humiliation only resolved through bribery and a negotiated peace that forced China into decades of costly tribute and marriage alliances with its northern neighbors, until the ascension of Emperor Wu, a 16-year-old who would go on to rule for 54 remarkable years and transform the empire's fortunes. Wu overhauled the military, built vast cavalry forces to match the Xiongnu on their own terms, and after decades of grinding warfare, finally broke the nomadic confederation's power, opening a narrow desert corridor known as the Hexi Corridor that connected China to the wider world for the very first time. Along this route flowed silk, tea, and jade westward, giving rise to what history now calls the Silk Road, a trade artery that eventually linked Han China to the Kushan Empire, the Parthian Empire, and even distant Rome, which Chinese envoys knew only by the name De Qin. And it was through this network that an emissary named Gan Wying traveled further west than any Chinese official before him, reaching the shores of the Mediterranean and bringing back detailed, if imperfect, accounts of Roman civilization. At its height, the Han Empire stood as one of only 2 great superpowers on Earth, its population and territory roughly matching Rome's own, and together the 2 empires are believed to have contained close to half of all humanity alive at the time. Yet even as Emperor Wu secured this golden age, he grew paranoid and cruel in his final years, famously ordering the historian Sima Qian castrated for daring to defend a disgraced general. And after Wu's death, the throne passed through a succession of weak and ineffective rulers, until a popular Confucian scholar named Wang Mang seized power outright, becoming the first non-Han emperor in 2 centuries. His reign proved disastrous, paralyzed by his own fear of delegating authority, and shattered by a catastrophic shift in the course of the Yellow River that displaced countless peasants and ignited widespread rebellion, most notably the uprising known as the Red Eyebrows, whose fury eventually stormed the capital, beheaded Wang Mang, and paraded his severed head through the streets, allowing the Han Dynasty to be restored, this time with its capital moved from Chang'an to the more secure city of Luoyang, beginning what historians call the later or Eastern Han period. This new era saw the reconquest of the Hexi corridor and a revival of trade and prosperity. But within the walls of the imperial palace itself, a far more insidious danger was taking root, as two rival factions, the palace eunuchs and the empress dowagers, waged a relentless, decades-long struggle for control over a succession of child emperors, several of whom died mysteriously before reaching adulthood, while the eunuchs in particular amassed staggering wealth and influence, manipulating young rulers who, in some recorded cases, referred to their eunuch guardians as father and mother. This corruption reached its peak under Emperor Ling, a ruler more interested in his harem and his hunting than in governance, who openly sold government offices for profit, while peasants starved under the weight of rising taxes, conditions that gave rise to the massive Yellow Turban Rebellion led by the Taoist mystic Zhang Jiao, a revolt that was eventually crushed, but left the empire's local governors and militias with newfound independent power. Among the military commanders who rose to prominence suppressing these rebellions was a ruthless general named Dong Zhuo, whose battle-hardened frontier troops were fiercely loyal to him personally rather than to the crumbling central government. And when a palace faction invited regional warlords to help purge the corrupt eunuchs from court, Dong Zhuo seized the opportunity, marched into Luoyang, deposed the reigning boy emperor, installed an even younger puppet ruler in his place, and effectively became the empire's true master through sheer military terror. When a coalition of outraged nobles rose against him, Dong Zhuo made the devastating decision to abandon Luoyang, forcibly relocating its population back to Chang'an and ordering the ancient capital burned to the ground, destroying its palaces, its temples, and its vast imperial libraries, which had once required 2,000 carts to transport and were reduced by the fires to a handful of surviving scrolls. Dong Zhuo himself did not long survive his own tyranny, assassinated by one of his own bodyguards, but the chaos he unleashed could not be undone, as rival warlords continued fighting over the puppet emperor and eventually burned Chang'an as well, leaving the young ruler, Emperor Xian, to flee on foot through a devastated countryside and return to a Luoyang so thoroughly ruined that his attendants were reduced to foraging for wild grain amid the rubble and the bones of the dead. A warlord named Cao Cao eventually rescued the beleaguered emperor and made one final attempt to reunify the fractured empire, but his ambitions were decisively checked at the Battle of Red Cliff in 208 AD, a naval engagement so vast it remains one of the largest in recorded history, and China subsequently splintered into 3 rival kingdoms, marking the definitive end of 4 centuries of Han rule. Emperor Xian himself was treated with unexpected mercy, living out his remaining years peacefully as a duke and dying at the age of 53, while the city of Luoyang lay abandoned and overgrown for decades, its collapsed palace halls colonized by foxes and thorn bushes, its once magnificent imperial tombs looted and plowed over by peasant farmers who tended their crops above the bones of forgotten emperors. And it is this image, of thorns growing through the throne room of a fallen golden age, that stands as the enduring lesson of the Han Dynasty's story, that no empire, however vast or prosperous, is immune to the slow, corrosive power of corruption, court intrigue, and the unchecked ambitions of those who are meant to serve it, a cycle of rise and ruin that history, again and again, has proven all too willing to repeat.